Looking back, I realize that everything I'm about to say could have been avoided if I had been a little more insightful or attentive. It seems to me that I was and remain naive, believing in the best even when the signs said otherwise. Some would say that I am not just naive, but stupid for allowing all this to happen. Perhaps that I am a cuckold, as the people call it. And they're probably right. When you look at the past, at what once seemed unshakable to you, but turned out to be just an illusion, you involuntarily begin to wonder, how could I not notice this? Were all the 20 years we lived together just preparation for this moment? My wife has always been a direct, frank, and honest woman. At least that's what I thought. And what happened was so uncharacteristic of her, so out of the ordinary, that I simply could not believe my eyes when everything became clear. I was caught off guard, like a lightning strike in the middle of a clear sky. During the 2 decades of our marriage, I was convinced that I knew her thoroughly, that I could predict her every move, every thought. But as it turned out, this confidence played a cruel joke on me. Was this the reason I didn't notice anything was wrong? Maybe. But now that time has passed, I can no longer change anything. I am not able to turn back time to fix, prevent, or stop anything. All I can do is wonder how I could have been so blind. Should I have been more attentive to her behavior, to those small details that could indicate change? Probably yes. I definitely should have felt something was wrong and noticed that she was planning something that would disrupt our usual flow of life. But hindsight, as they say, makes everyone stronger. And now I am forced to bear the burden of these thoughts, knowing that the past cannot be returned. It all started when I overheard a conversation between my wife Sarah and her best friend Sandra. The snippets of what I heard sounded something like this. "You're kidding, Sandra, right? Are you saying you had sex with another man while you were there? Does Ken know? No, Sandra, I don't believe you, but you're 40, I mean." At that moment, I became so interested that I quietly picked up the other phone to eavesdrop on what they were talking about. I just hoped the women wouldn't notice. I was just in time to hear my wife say, "When will this be?" And Sandra replied, "I think next February." Then I heard my wife say, "I'm so jealous of you, Sandra. You know I've always wanted another one. I may have to do the same thing you did." "Ha," Sandra replied, "you've always been a wannabe, Sarah. But would you really dare to do what I did? Well, you better tell me all the details, and I'll prove to you that I'm serious." "Well, if you're sure. Yes, his name is Nikos, and the tavern is called the Olive Tree. It's only 400 meters from the apartments, so you can't miss it." "Okay, I'll let you know what happens." At that moment, I hung up the phone and hastily retreated so as not to be caught eavesdropping. A few minutes later, Sarah appeared, slightly flushed, and sat down next to me. "You'll never guess, Sandra is pregnant." "What?" I gasped in real shock. "Pregnant? But she's the same age as you." Apparently, this was the wrong thing to say as it caused an angry reaction. "So what you're saying, Peter, is that at 42, I'm too old to be a mother?" "Well, no, women don't usually get pregnant at that age, right?" "No, not usually," Sarah replied, "but these things happen. Some women yearn for pregnancy and want to prove that they can still have a baby. Don't forget that many women are postponing having babies, so it's not that unusual now." As I thought about her words, I realized she was right. I'd often read about women giving birth in their late 30s and early 40s, so it really wasn't anything special. While I was thinking about this, Sarah said, "Oh, by the way, I've booked us a week's holiday to Greece in 2 weeks." "What? Why? This is so unexpected." "Well, I thought we could use some late summer sun, and they suggested a quiet place." Okay, was all I could answer. Although I didn't know what was going on, I suspected it had something to do with Sandra, and given the history of rivalry between her and my wife, I felt a little uneasy about the suddenly planned vacation. Now I realize I was a little dumb and could have, no, should have, put all the pieces together, but I didn't. Perhaps because I knew, or at least thought I knew, my wife. She was always a bit of a prude and never gave me any reason to doubt her loyalty. 2 weeks after that ill-fated conversation, which I still couldn't stop thinking about, we found ourselves on the island of Crete. Time passed, and I hoped that the trip would help distract me and regain the lost peace. It was already the end of September, but the heat, despite the approaching autumn, still persisted. The air was filled with the salty taste of the sea and the smells of flowering plants that grew in abundance along the roads. A light breeze blowing from the Aegean Sea at least slightly softened the scorching sun, but it was not enough to completely get rid of the heat. However, this weather was exactly what we were waiting for. We were both dreaming of warm, sunny days away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and I sincerely hoped that a week in Crete would benefit both of us. This was a chance not only to relax, but also, perhaps, to find each other again, to relax not only with body, but also with soul. I thought this island, with its ancient ruins, cozy villages, and endless beaches, would be the perfect place for such a break. The taxi we took from the airport rocked gently on the narrow, winding roads of Crete. We drove past olive groves, vineyards, and old houses with whitewashed walls and bright shutters. The village where we stayed was small and seemed lost in time. Its streets were covered with cobblestones, and there were clay pots with lush flowers everywhere. The car smoothly slowed down and stopped at a residential building, a white building with a flat roof and a terrace covered with grapevines. We were greeted by a charming host, a tall Greek man with a warm smile and tan skin, wearing a light linen shirt and worn sandals. His wife stood a little further away with a good-natured smile and waved her hand to us. The owner quickly introduced himself and began to greet us warmly, speaking in softly accented broken English. We exchanged pleasantries. He assured us that the weather was still wonderful at this time of year, and the local beaches and taverns were the best on the entire island. His wife nodded modestly, assenting to his every word. They were both incredibly welcoming, and it immediately created a feeling of comfort and warmth. Finally, they showed us to our apartment on the first floor. We entered a spacious, sunny room with large windows overlooking the sea. It was cool inside, thanks to the thick stone walls, and quiet. The only sound that could be heard was the distant sound of the surf and the light rustle of palm branches outside the window. "Well, it's very nice here," Sarah said, standing on the balcony and leaning on the metal railing. Her hair was slightly ruffled by the sea wind, and her eyes sparkled with pleasure. "From our balcony, you can see the sea." She was right. The view from here was stunning. The azure waters of the Aegean Sea stretched to the horizon, their surface sparkling under the rays of the setting sun, which painted the sky in soft pink and orange tones. The apartment was truly excellent. Spacious rooms with high ceilings, walls painted in warm pastel shades, and large windows through which soft, golden light streamed. All this created an atmosphere of calm and comfort. We quickly unpacked our things, placing them on the shelves of the wooden closet and leaving our suitcases in the corner. Having barely felt at home, we were both already attracted by the fresh air and the smell of coastal restaurants that came from the street. With a slight feeling of hunger, we decided to go in search of a tavern to have dinner and get a taste of the local cuisine. The streets of the village were quiet and almost deserted at this evening hour. Local residents strolled leisurely or sat at the thresholds of their houses, exchanging phrases and lazily sipping coffee. A cool breeze from the sea blew across my face, and the air was filled with the aroma of ripe olives, fresh bread, and smoke from the grill. We walked along a narrow street paved with stone, among old houses with blooming bougainvillea and jasmine, until we came across a small but cozy tavern with wooden tables placed right on the street, under the shade of vines. Luckily, the place was not far from our apartment, and we immediately sat down at one of the open-air tables. The evening was warm, and the quiet sound of the sea in the distance created a relaxing atmosphere. The owner of the tavern, an elderly Greek with a thick mustache, quickly approached us with a menu and with a smile advised us to try local dishes. We ordered traditional moussaka, fresh fish, and a rustic feta salad, which was garnished with large, juicy olives. During dinner, we chatted leisurely, enjoying the warm atmosphere and the taste of wine. Sarah seemed to gradually relax, her face lighting up with a calmness that I had not seen for a long time. Between sips of wine, she mentioned that she had heard of a good tavern nearby. They say the food there is great, she said, tearing off a piece of warm bread. How did you know? I asked, looking at her across the table. She thought for a moment before answering. Sandra told me when we were discussing the trip. She mentioned that her friends were here recently and found this tavern. I nodded, remembering a recent conversation I had overheard, but tried not to focus on it. Well, if you want, we can go there tomorrow night, I suggested, trying to sound casual. Sarah smiled and her eyes lit up. Yes, that would be great. I think it's a great idea. She seemed really excited about the offer, and that warmed me up a little. The evening continued in a pleasant, relaxed atmosphere, and I began to hope that this vacation could become something important and necessary for us, perhaps even a turning point. We spent the next day lazily relaxing on the beach, and when we returned to the apartment, I noticed that Sarah was excited, getting ready for our evening out. I assume we're still going to that tavern tonight, she asked. Yes, I don't mind. You know I love trying different places to eat. And so, an hour later, when it began to get dark, we went to the tavern. Do you know what it's called? I asked. I think it's called the Olive Tree. Interesting, I thought. I can't wait to see what's so special about it. After 15 minutes of walking, we arrived at a secluded tavern on the outskirts of our village. It looked very nice, and we noticed that there was only one couple dining there when we arrived. While we were standing, deciding where to sit, a man appeared and greeted us. Hello, hello, sit wherever you want. We don't have many guests today. While he was talking, I suddenly noticed that my wife was looking at him carefully. There was something more in her gaze than simple curiosity or polite interest. She seemed to be studying the man intently, as if trying to understand something hidden. At first, I didn't attach any importance to this, but when I looked at him more closely, I immediately understood what exactly attracted her attention. In the dim light of the street lamps, his face was barely visible, but when he stepped closer to us, under the light of the tavern, his features became more distinct. Now that I looked at him, I realized that this man was truly attractive. He looked to be about 50 years old, maybe a little older, but he looked younger than his age. His long, dark hair, lightly streaked with gray, fell to his shoulders, adding a peculiar elegance to his image, as if he had stepped off the cover of an old glossy magazine. He had classic features, as if carved from stone, a well-defined chin, strong cheekbones, and a straight nose. Thick dark eyebrows and pronounced eyes gave him a certain mystery, an almost predatory charm that could easily captivate anyone. His skin was tanned, like those who spend a lot of time in the sun, and this only enhanced his attractiveness. He had a natural confidence and charm that seemed to influence everyone around him. I felt a slight pang of jealousy, although I couldn't explain why. Sarah continued to look at him, and for a moment it seemed to me that her interest in this man was too intense, too obvious, but I quickly dismissed this thought, deciding that it was just my fantasy. While I was looking at him, the man smiled and said that he would bring us a menu now. His voice was deep and melodic, like a professional storyteller. Every word sounded measured and confident. I followed him with my gaze until he walked deeper into the tavern, and again looked at Sarah, who seemed to be thoughtfully continuing to follow his movements, lost in her thoughts. He seems really nice, Sarah said. Yes, he is, but most waiters in Greece are very friendly, aren't they? Oh, I guess he's not a waiter, he's the owner of this place, my wife replied. How do you know this? I just think it is, Sarah hesitated. Suddenly, a man appeared and brought us menus. He asked where we were from, and before I could answer, Sarah said, We're from England. Actually, my friend told me about this tavern and you. I know your name is Nikos. Now I knew his name, and when I looked at him, I saw that he actually looked surprised. What's your friend's name? Nikos asked. Her name is Sandra, and her husband is Ken. Do you remember them? They were here earlier this year. Nikos didn't answer right away, but he looked a little thoughtful. Finally, he said, Yes, I remember both of them, and especially Sandra, she was. Well, she was a very special woman. How is she? While maintaining eye contact with him, my wife said, "Oh, she's doing well. By the way, she's pregnant." I wasn't sure why Sarah needed to break this particular news to this stranger, but I noticed he smiled widely at the words. "This is wonderful. This is very good for such a beautiful woman." I thought he was going to say something else, but after a pause, he asked what we wanted to drink. I immediately ordered a liter of red wine, and he went to get our order. Once he was far enough away, I asked Sarah why she told him that Sandra was pregnant. At first, she didn't answer, but then she said something to the effect that she thought he might be interested since he was dating them. Why should he be interested in this? He only met them a couple of times. "Oh, I think I met them a few times, according to Sandra," Sarah replied. I was about to say something else when Nikos returned with our wine. "Now that you know my name, beauty, you must tell me yours," he said. "My name is Sarah, and this is my husband, Peter." Nikos smiled widely, took my wife's hand, and brought it to his lips. "It's very nice to meet you," he said. "Now I'll leave you to choose from the menu." After he left, I said, "That was a little weird." "What's strange?" Sarah asked, looking at the menu. "Well, that was pretty old-fashioned, wasn't it? I mean, kissing a lady's hand is something you rarely see these days." "No, you won't, but if you must know, I find it quite interesting." "Oh," was all I could answer and looked at the menu. In the end, we decided on what we would eat and placed our order. The menu offered a wide selection of traditional Cretan dishes, and we spent a long time hesitating between the different options, debating what to try. In the end, we settled on a fish platter and local delicacies moussaka, grilled octopus, and crispy zucchini fritters with yogurt sauce. While we waited for our food, we enjoyed a calm evening, watching the evening lights of the village reflect on the water, and in the distance, beyond the treetops, the sea shimmered under the moon. The food was excellent. The fish was fresh, soft, with a slight flavor of the sea, char-grilled to perfection with a touch of olive oil and fresh lemon juice. The octopus was served crispy, and the moussaka melted in your mouth, leaving rich, layered flavors of spices, meat, and eggplant. We ate with great appetite, enjoying every bite. Sarah smiled, her eyes sparkled with pleasure, and this calmed me down a little. At such moments, it seemed that all worries and anxieties were far behind us, and we could simply enjoy each other and the wonderful atmosphere. Our conversation at dinner was light and relaxed. We discussed our trip, talked about plans for tomorrow, recalled past trips, and shared our impressions of the food. I was glad that I could see Sarah so relaxed, as if all the heaviness that I had noticed on her face lately had dissolved in this warm Cretan evening. We laughed and drank local wine, tart and aromatic. It perfectly complemented our dinner. Luckily, Nikos, that charming host, didn't show up until we had finished dinner and were sitting relaxed drinking the remaining wine. It was nice he gave us time to enjoy each other and the food without being rushed or intrusive. However, soon, as if sensing the right moment, he reappeared, smoothly emerging from the shadows, as only true restaurant owners who know when to intervene during the evening can do. He approached our table with the same wide smile as before, looking at us with his bright eyes. We were already full, and the evening seemed to be coming to an end when his voice rang out softly and insinuatingly. "Would you like some brandy?" Nikos asked, almost sing-song, as if he was offering us something more than just a drink. His voice was low and warm, and his gaze was friendly but attentive. I immediately said yes because I love Greek brandy. Nikos left and soon returned with 3 glasses. "Do you mind if I join?" he asked. Before I could answer, Sarah said, "Yes, of course, sit down." Nikos pulled a chair up to our table, and we were soon engaged in animated conversation. From the very first moment, it became clear that this man was not just a charming tavern owner, but also a skilled storyteller. He spoke with such passion that it was impossible not to listen to him, even despite being tired after a long day. There was sincerity in his voice, and his facial expressions, wide smiles, sudden hand gestures added even more liveliness to the stories. The conversation covered a variety of topics, from life in Crete, where he claimed time flowed differently, to his personal stories that suddenly made us feel like old friends sitting around the same table. Nikos talked about his youth, how, being young and energetic, he traveled a lot around Europe, enjoying a free life. It turned out that he had visited not only England, but also Spain, Italy, and France, and each of his stories was accompanied by vivid details about the tastes of local food, about the people he met, about the cities that impressed him. Sarah, sitting opposite, seemed completely fascinated by Nikos. She literally caught his every word. Her eyes were fixed on him with an interest that I had not seen in her gaze for a long time. She did not interrupt him, but each time she asked questions that only encouraged him to talk further. She was especially interested in the story of how Nikos never got married, although, as he admitted, he had many girlfriends when he was in his 20s and 30s. "Are you really not married?" Sarah asked in surprise, her voice full of surprise and, perhaps, hidden curiosity. Nikos smiled slightly, leaning back in his chair and playing with his glass. He nodded. "Yes, that's how it happened. I dated a lot of wonderful women, but, I don't know, for some reason none of it turned into something more." He paused, as if considering his words, and added with a hint of regret. "Once, many years ago, in England, I met a girl. She was great. We were together for a couple of years, and I thought maybe this was it. But—" He paused, as if remembering something personal, and continued. "My family at that time needed help with their business, and I was forced to return to Crete." Sarah listened to him without taking her eyes off, her face expressing sympathy and deep interest. Nikos said that after returning home, he tried to maintain a long-distance relationship, but life turned out to be more difficult than they expected. "In the end, we broke up. She couldn't leave her life in England, and I couldn't stay there any longer. That's how it ended." He shrugged slightly, but there was a slight sadness in his eyes, which he tried to hide behind a smile. Sarah shook her head, and something flashed in her gaze that I could not immediately understand. Perhaps it was a longing for a time when such stories touched her heart. There was a special understanding between them, as if this story touched on something deeper than just a fleeting memory of a past love. I sat and watched their conversation unfold, feeling a little distant, but still trying not to show it. When I looked at the clock, I realized that it was almost midnight, and I told Sarah that it was time for us to return to the apartment. Reluctantly, she agreed. Nikos said that we should come the next evening, and he would cook the fish he caught for us. Before I could say anything, Sarah agreed and said she was looking forward to it. As we were leaving, Nikos took my wife's hand again and kissed it, saying more to her than to me. "I look forward to seeing you again. Tomorrow I will give you my full attention." Sarah smiled, blushed, and said that she would be looking forward to it too. We walked back to our apartment, holding hands, but mostly in silence. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts. However, as soon as we were in the apartment, Sarah pounced on me and said, "Peter, come quickly, make love to me." I was a little taken aback by her sudden display of passion, but quickly did what she asked. A few minutes later, we were lying next to each other. I couldn't help but ask, "What was that?" "What do you mean?" "Well, we haven't been this spontaneous in a long time, have we?" "No, they weren't. I don't know what caused it, but I just needed it." I was a little surprised by Sarah's choice of words that evening, as she usually considered such language inappropriate for conversation, especially in such a setting. Perhaps it was the result of the wine she drank, or simply the atmosphere of Crete, with its relaxed pace of life, allowed her to behave a little more freely than usual. In any case, these little things were quickly forgotten, and soon we both went to bed, feeling pleasantly tired after a busy day. The night was warm and quiet, the soft rustling of the sea breeze could be heard from the open windows, and we quickly fell into a deep sleep that was not interrupted until the morning. We woke up around 9 in the morning, which was quite late for us, but apparently the flight and acclimatization did their job. By this time, the heat had already begun to increase. The sun's rays penetrate through the curtains, filling the room with a bright, golden light. I got out of bed and stretched, then went to the window and opened the curtains. A magnificent view opened before me, another sun-drenched day. The sky was cloudless, azure, and in the distance, the sea surface shone like an endless blue canvas, spreading to the very horizon. There was a characteristic morning freshness in the air, not yet dissolved in the heat, and a subtle splash of waves could be heard. When I returned to the bedroom, Sarah was already in the shower, and I heard running water outside the bathroom door. I smiled quietly. These small moments of calm always seemed special to me on our trips. While she was in the shower, I lazily walked around the room, enjoying this leisurely morning. When Sarah finished, she emerged with wet hair, the scent of her shampoo mingling with the scents of the fresh morning air, filling the room with a slight floral note. She looked relaxed and rested, which calmed me down a little. I took my turn in the shower, letting the cool water wash away any remaining sleepiness and refresh my body for the new day. The shower turned out to be one of those pleasant moments when you feel the water revitalizing you, preparing you for a new day full of promise and adventure. Then, fully awake, we leisurely had breakfast on our balcony. In the rays of the morning sun, which was already warming but not yet burning, we enjoyed a light breakfast. On the table were fresh croissants bought yesterday at a local bakery, aromatic coffee, and ripe fruits, figs, peaches, and slices of juicy oranges. We sat on wooden chairs, breathing in the warm sea air, and talked about what we were planning to do next. It was a perfect morning, leisurely, calm, filled with light and aromas that could only be here in Crete. "What are your plans for today?" I asked. "None. How about we spend a lazy day at the beach?" I saw a sign for the beach, and I always wanted to try being naked on the beach. To say that I was surprised is to say nothing. My usually modest wife couldn't do something like that, could she? I often thought about proposing to her, but I thought I knew her answer. But since such an opportunity arose, I eagerly grabbed her offer. "That would be great. I didn't know you might like it, or I might have asked sooner." "Oh, Sandra said she tried it, and it wasn't as scary as she thought it would be, so I thought, if she can do it, so can I." This is Sandra's imitation again, I thought. Over the years, Sandra had accused Sarah of imitating her more than once because Sarah often did the same things as their friends. She had copied Sandra especially often in recent years, and I wondered why Sarah felt the need to do so. All these thoughts were running through my head as we packed up for the beach and headed to where I was going to see my wife naked in public for the first time. The beach turned out to be beautiful and quite quiet. I saw a few other couples and a few single men. We chose a spot, set up a beach umbrella, and Sarah took off her dress, and then, more slowly, her swimsuit. I followed her lead, and after we applied sunscreen to each other, we relaxed and began to tan. I was a little nervous and couldn't completely relax, but it allowed me to keep an eye on what was happening on the beach. As time passed, several new people arrived, and I noticed that one or two men made no attempt to hide their lustful glances as they examined my wife, who lay on her back with her firm breasts on full display. Finally, Sarah asked if I wanted to go for a swim. This meant walking about 30 meters of beach to get to the water and walking past other naked people who were lying or standing. In any case, I thought to hell with everything, and taking my wife by the hand, we headed towards the water. It turned out to be not as scary as I had feared, and no one paid any attention to us. After all, this was a beach for nude sunbathers. Once in the water, it felt very refreshing and natural to swim naked. As we disembarked, we ran into one of the lone men on the beach, and despite his efforts, he couldn't take his eyes off Sarah's breasts glistening in the sun. The rest of the day passed in the same spirit. There was a small snack bar behind the beach where you could eat naked. This was an eye-opener for me, and I was impressed by how much Sarah opened up on this trip. I was sure that she would never think about being naked on the beach, let alone having lunch naked among other people. But she did it, and I was proud of her. Around 5 o'clock in the evening, we decided to return to the apartment and get ready for the evening out. When we returned to our apartment after our walk, the sun was already setting, turning the sky orange and pink. Both tired and slightly excited about the upcoming evening, we immediately went to the shower. The freshness of the water washed away the remnants of the day's heat, and after that it seemed as if the day had begun all over again. Sarah finished getting ready first, and by the time I left the bathroom, it was already well after 7 o'clock. She stood in front of the mirror, putting the finishing touches on her outfit, and when I saw her, my breath caught for a moment. She looked amazing. She wore a blue and white Grecian-style dress, light and flowing, which perfectly accentuated her figure. The dress ended just above her knees, revealing her slender, tanned legs that looked especially attractive in the evening light. The fabric of the dress softly flowed around her body, emphasizing her waist and revealing her shoulders, giving her appearance elegance and grace. White sandals with thin heels were perfectly matched to the outfit, elegantly highlighting her long legs. My eyes lingered on her feet, neat and well-groomed, with impeccably painted nails in a soft pink shade that emphasized her femininity and sophistication. Gold jewelry complemented her look. Thin bracelets on her wrists jingled softly with every movement, and small drop earrings caught the last rays of the setting sun, shimmering with gold. A delicate necklace sparkled around her neck, gently framing her collarbones and silken skin. Sarah looked amazing, like a real Greek goddess who descended from Olympus. She smiled at me in response to my gaze, and there was something warm in this smile, as if a reminder of how many years we have been together, and how every time I rediscover her beauty. I approached her from behind. "Peter, stop it, we're going out." "I know, but I want you now. You look so desirable." Sarah responded cryptically, "That's the point. Now come on, let's go have dinner." I was slightly disappointed. When we arrived at the tavern, I noticed that, like last time, there was only one couple there. When Nikos saw us, he hurried towards us and said, "Welcome, welcome, let me show you to your table." He took Sarah's hand and led her to a table in the corner. He helped my wife sit down and said, "Here, Peter, sit down, I'll get you some wine." "Thank you, Nikos, but could we start with the ouzo and then move on to the wine?" Of course, ouzo is the perfect choice to start the evening. When he left, I noticed that Sarah was again looking after him with some longing. By the time we drank the ouzo, I noticed that the other couple had already left, so we were the only ones left in the tavern. When the food arrived, I was surprised at how big the fish were. "Did you catch them yourself, Nikos?" I asked. "Yes, I went fishing this morning and caught them on my boat." "They look amazing," Sarah said. "How did you prepare them?" "Oh, just grilled, with a little love," Nikos replied. Sarah looked up and smiled at Nikos, and he said he would leave us to enjoy our meal. An hour later, we had finished, and were finishing our wine when Nikos reappeared. "Would you like some brandy?" he asked. "Yes, please," we both replied in unison, and we all laughed. "Do you mind if I join?" Nikos asked. "No, of course not. I honestly hoped you would join," Sarah replied. When the plates were cleared and Nikos returned with rather large glasses of brandy, we began talking again as before. This time Nikos asked a lot of questions and finally asked about children. We said that we already have an adult family, a son and daughter who are studying at universities. Looking at Nikos, Sarah said, "I would like to have more children, but Peter said 2 are enough." I started responding, "Well, it was a joint decision, wasn't it? We both." But before I could finish, Nikos said, "But you can have more children, right? Sarah is still quite young." That's what I told Peter when I found out Sandra was pregnant. She's the same age as me, you know. "Yeah, she's about 30, right?" "No, stupid, she's over 40. She didn't tell you that." "Well, not exactly, but she had the figure of a young woman." "How could you know?" Sarah grinned. "Unless you saw it yourself, didn't you?" Well, she was very beautiful, but not as beautiful as you. I would gladly give you what I gave her." This conversation was moving too quickly for me, and I was having a hard time keeping up with what was happening. Sarah looked either shocked or experiencing some other emotion that I couldn't recognize. Nikos suddenly stood up from the table and said, "Sorry, I upset you. I'll leave you." As soon as he left, I looked at Sarah and said, "What does this all mean?" "Oh, nothing special. I'll be back in a minute. I just need to tell Nikos that I wasn't offended." With that, Sarah followed Nikos into the tavern, and I stayed behind, trying to make sense of the whole conversation. Gradually, everything began to take shape in my head. Sandra was probably seduced by Nico's here in this tavern. But then, no, it can't be. Suddenly it dawned on me what I should have understood a long time ago. Nico's made Sandra pregnant. She was carrying his child, not her husband's child. I suddenly realized that, being a little tipsy, I had lost track of time, and more than 10 minutes had passed and Sarah had not returned. I decided that I should go and look for her. When I entered the tavern, it seemed to me that I heard sounds from the depths of the room, and following them, I found myself at the bedroom door. Looking through the slightly open door, my jaw literally dropped. I saw Nico's and my wife kissing. Everything happened so quickly that I barely had time to comprehend what was happening. I felt like I had to say something. "Sarah, what's going on here? Are you crazy, drunk, or both?" "Sorry, Peter, but this is what I have to do. And if you remember, a few years ago, this was your fantasy." "What do you mean?" "I mean your fantasy is to see me with another man. Don't you remember? We often talked about this when we made love." "Yes, but it was, well, just a fantasy, wasn't it?" "Maybe, but I never forgot how you insisted on it. And well, this opportunity was too tempting to pass up." During our conversation, Nikos listened carefully and finally decided to intervene. "Listen, Peter, I know it's not easy for you, but there's something more between me and Sarah. We're really attracted to each other. Let's just relax and have a good time tonight. You can stay with us if you want." The story turned out to be much more complex and painful for Peter than he could have expected. The anxiety that had been building within him ever since he overheard that conversation between Sarah and Sandra finally boiled over in a shocking revelation. But he was faced with a difficult choice what to do in this situation. He could have done something impulsive, driven away, hit Nikos, or abandoned Sarah there and then, but Peter wasn't one to make hasty decisions. The years spent together, their children, their history, all this pulsed in his head. Peter looked at Sarah, expecting to see remorse in her eyes, but instead he noticed a challenge and some kind of quiet satisfaction. It was not just her act, but her way of asserting her will, her desires that she had suppressed for too long. And perhaps, deep down, Peter knew that his own imagination also played a role in what was happening. Taking a deep breath, Peter closed his eyes for a few moments, trying to find the right words. Anger, humiliation, and a sense of betrayal warred within him, but there was also a sense that this was a moment of truth, not only for Sarah, but for himself. "Is this really what you want?" Peter finally asked, his voice quiet but firm. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She looked at Nikos, then back at Peter. "I don't know," she said, "but I feel like this is something I need to live through. I can't ignore what I feel anymore." Peter came closer, his heart pounding, but his face remained calm. "You're talking about freedom, but do you know that if you cross that line, everything will change? Are you ready for this?" Sarah froze. Her resolve suddenly began to melt, and for a moment she again became the woman he knew, the one with whom he had spent 2 decades of his life. Her eyes filled with tears, and she finally replied, "I'm not sure." Nikos silently watched their conversation. His confidence also diminished somewhat. He knew now was not the time to interfere. Peter exhaled. "You know what, Sarah," he began. "If this is really what you want, then I won't stop you. But I can't stay. If you choose this, you are losing me." Silence hung in the air. Sarah fought back her tears, realizing that every next step could become a turning point. Nikos was silent. He was no longer the confident man who was flirting carefree a few minutes ago. Peter turned around and headed towards the exit. He didn't want to be a part of this drama anymore. Leaving the two of them, he walked through the dark streets of Crete, not knowing what awaited him next, but feeling that today he had lost something important that, perhaps, could not be returned. Tomorrow everything will change. Peter walked along the narrow streets, immersed in his thoughts, and his steps echoed loudly in the silence of the night. Fragments of memories throbbed in my head, the years of marriage with Sarah, their children, the first happy moments and more recent disappointments. He felt a dull pain growing under his skin, not only because of what had happened, but also because of the knowledge that their marriage had long been falling apart at the seams. The fact that he only now noticed these cracks made the pain even stronger. He reached the apartment, but did not go inside. Instead, Peter sat on the balcony, looking out over the dark expanse of the sea. The breeze pleasantly blew across his face, but everything was boiling inside. Images of Nikos and Sarah rose before my eyes, her look, her embarrassment, and how she did not reject the possibility of betrayal. It hit him harder than he expected. Peter couldn't sit in silence for long. He took out his phone and found Sandra's number. It was her voice, those scraps of conversation from which it all began, that stirred up this suspicion and brought him here. Now he needed to understand whether all this was true, or whether he was mistaken in his conclusions. He looked at the screen for a long time, not daring to press the call button, but in the end, his fingers dialed the number. Sandra's sleepy voice came from the other end of the phone. "Peter, is it you? Everything is fine?" "Sandra, I need to know," Peter began, trying to keep his voice steady. "Are you really? Did you really get pregnant from Nikos?" The silence on the other side of the line lasted for several moments. He heard Sandra take a deep breath. "Peter, why are you asking me this?" In her voice, there was a feeling that she understood what was being said, but did not want to admit it. "Because Sarah is there now. With him," Peter felt his voice begin to shake. "And I need to know how this ends. You were with him, and now my wife." He stopped, unable to finish the thought. Sandra was silent for a long time before she said, "Peter, I thought you'd never know. But since you asked, yes, it's true. Nikos is the father of my child." These words hit Peter like a cold shower, but to some extent it was expected. He heard again that conversation between Sarah and Sandra, which was the beginning of his suspicions. He himself knew this for a long time, but he wanted to hear from her. "Did you know Sarah was going to do the same thing?" he asked sharply. Sandra was silent, then slowly answered, I didn't know she would go that far. We were just talking, fantasizing. But I didn't think that she would decide to do this. You have to understand, Peter, we all have moments of weakness when we lose control." Peter fell silent, feeling rage overcome him. He didn't expect that talking to Sandra would make him calmer. This only confirmed his worst fears. Sarah could cheat on him, like Sandra cheated on her husband. "Sandra, I can't take this anymore," Peter said sharply. "I thought that I could somehow save our marriage, but all this is too much. Thank you for your honesty, but I have to go." He turned off the phone, feeling like everything was burning inside him. Returning to the apartment, he sat on the edge of the bed and stared at one point for a long time. He was faced with a choice: leave Sarah, ending their relationship forever, or try to fight for what they had left. The clock struck midnight when Peter heard the apartment door slowly open. Sarah entered, quietly, so as not to wake him. She looked embarrassed, and in her eyes there was a mixture of emotions: guilt, fear, but also some kind of quiet persistence. Peter got out of bed. "Did you sleep with him?" His voice was calm, but all the pain and disappointment of the last hours was felt in it. Peter looked at Sarah silently. His eyes were heavy, filled with pain and misunderstanding. She stood at the door, not yet fully realizing that, with her actions, she had just ruined 20 years of their life together. There was a mixture of guilt and some kind of aloof determination in her gaze, which seemed to say, "I did what I had to do." But this was not enough. Not for him. He repeated his question. "Did you sleep with him?" Sarah sat on the edge of the bed without looking up, her hands nervously fiddling with the hem of her dress. She was silent for too long, as if she was weighing whether to tell the truth. But then, realizing that there was nothing more to hide, she said quietly, "Yes." There was silence in the room, a thick, heavy silence that was impossible to break. Peter closed his eyes, trying to cope with the emotions that were boiling inside. He felt anger, disappointment, and a sense of betrayal come in waves, threatening to overwhelm him. "Do you realize you just ruined everything?" His voice sounded muffled, as if it was coming from another room. He could hardly believe that he was saying these words. Sarah raised her head, her eyes shining with tears that she could no longer hold back. Peter, I don't know how this happened. I wasn't myself. It was all some kind of dream, an illusion. I, Dream? Illusion? Peter interrupted her, his voice getting louder. This is not a dream, Sarah. You cheated on me. You chose someone else's man simply because you wanted to. Just because your friend did it. How could you put everything on the line for? For this? Sarah began to shake with sobs, but he felt no pity. His love, his trust in her, all this has now turned to ashes. It was too late for tears. You always copied Sandra, Peter continued, his voice becoming sharper, burning her with every word. But this is already beyond the bounds. You didn't just imitate her. You let her control your life. So what now? Did you think you could come here and just apologize and I'd forget everything that happened? Did you think this wouldn't break us? Sarah could no longer hold back. Her tears flowed freely. But she couldn't find the words to justify herself because there was no excuse. She understood this herself. Was I never good enough for you? Is it because I'm not Nico's? Or because I'm not Sandra? Peter was on the verge. Do you know what's the worst thing? I knew something was wrong. I saw the signs, but like an idiot, I decided it was all my imagination. 20 years of marriage, Sarah, and everything we built, you destroyed in one evening. Sarah sobbed, looking up in despair. Peter, I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me. I'm confused. I love you. Is it true? But I can't live anymore, suppressing myself, my desires. Your wish, his voice sounded almost sarcastic. Your desire to live someone else's life, be someone you're not. Just look at you, Sarah. You've lost yourself. And with that, she lost us both. Peter got out of bed and slowly walked to the window, looking at the dark expanse of the sea. He had always thought that their marriage was stronger than all the little problems that had arisen over the years. He believed that even despite all the difficulties, they could overcome everything together. But now, it seemed impossible. I can't take this anymore, he said finally, without turning to face her. I can't be with you, knowing that you betrayed me, that you wanted to be someone other than yourself. I can no longer look at you and see the woman I once loved. Sarah tried to approach him, but he stopped her with a gesture. No need, it's all over. Peter, please, no. She tried to touch his arm, but he pulled away as if her touch was burning. I filed for divorce, he said quietly, looking at her with cold calm. You destroyed our marriage. You chose this life. Now live with the consequences. He left the room, leaving her completely alone. There was a feeling of emptiness in the air. Sarah sank onto the bed, buried in the pillow. Her tears could no longer stop. Months have passed since that evening in Crete. Sarah tried to win Peter back, but he was unmoved. The marriage was destroyed, and even time could not heal these wounds. Peter moved to another apartment, leaving their home to the children, who, like him, were drawn into this whirlwind of destruction. Their children were shocked when they learned about what happened. At first, they blamed their father for his coldness and abandonment, but after learning the truth, they realized that it was their mother who destroyed everything. Sarah lost not only her husband, but also the trust of her children, who now looked at her with bewilderment. How could they understand that their mother, the person they always considered an example, suddenly cheated on their father? She found herself emotionally and morally isolated. Sandra, of course, was not the best support. Ken, having learned about her betrayal, also filed for divorce. Now they were both alone, surrounded only by the echoes of their destroyed lives. All of Sarah's attempts to repair her relationship with the children or Peter were in vain. They couldn't forgive, and perhaps they never could. Peter, despite the pain, began a new life. He ceased to be the person who constantly believed in the best. He became more insightful and careful. Sometimes he wanted to believe that he could still love again, but it hadn't happened yet. Be that as it may, Peter made his choice. He chose himself, his freedom from betrayal, from the eternal imitation of someone else's life. He realized that he could no longer be with a woman who could not be herself. Sarah was left alone, bitterly aware that her actions had destroyed everything that mattered. By imitating her friend, she lost her life. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.